here's my excavator. Everybody can see the presentation. So we actually, well, I'll do my little intro first because we just all introduced each other to each other. But I've been doing this almost 10 years now, but we got into it because we sold a property management company that we had and sold it to private equity. That was, I don't know how many years ago now, but that's really what kind of was the impetus moving forward into business brokerage, moving more into the M&A. And then I also have a real estate background. So some of us will come into the space through real estate. That is the way that I came through with the property management company. You end up working with people in the commercial space, and then they want to sell their business, and you're like, okay, I'm the kind of person that will put my hand up and yeah, I'll do it, sure. And then you end up getting into the IBBA because you want to learn more education, and then here you are, right? So that's what I do. We've been agnostic to the industry we've been working with for pretty much for the last 10 years, and we're just recently focusing down in the excavation space. So that's something that we're going to work on moving forward here. That's the industry that we're going to work on. But that being said, prior to that, we've sold all sorts of stuff. So clinical trial companies and oil and gas companies and hair salons, restaurants, and all sorts of stuff. Standard business brokerage was what we were really doing prior to the last year. So that's my background. I met Liz through a couple of events that we ran. We ran an event in January called the Exit Plan Summit, which basically we got 700 business owners out to that, and we had 30 speakers from around the world actually that ran M&A practices that spoke at that event. And then that kind of opened the doors to us to people with CEPAs and the whole exit planning industry. And then we ran an event in September called 10X Live, and that was more catered to people that specialize in exit planning and helping business owners transition their business. So I think that's why I may be here, is because I'm used to being on the camera virtually because of these events. But this is kind of a cool topic, and I think, like many of us, if Liz asks for things to be done and Giselle's asks for things to be done, I'm happy to provide that and be a presenter. I will say a big shout out and thanks to Village Wealth, because for us, our last two deals have actually come through Village Wealth, and I think the most recent buyer that we have for a transaction we're doing may have also come through Village Wealth. So this ecosystem, I think, is going to be really great for all of us in connecting buyers and sellers and just people in the industry in general. So that's kind of a little bit about myself. But to start the presentation here, I have 2 slides. That's all I have, just to really start our conversation and walk through these, and people can jump in and have a conversation around these. There's mostly a conversation starter. But what do sellers want from a buyer? And I think this is like a really interesting perspective to look at it from, because for brokers and M&A advisors and much of the people that are on the call right now, we do represent the sell side. And so we have a pretty good understanding of what the sellers are wanting, but no one's out there necessarily educating buyers on what these sellers are wanting. So I think it's kind of a cool topic. And at the end of the day, you can kind of consolidate it down to these 3 points. So they want an easy sale process. That's what sellers want. I'll go into depth in these in the next slide, but they want a party that they can trust. It doesn't matter what we're buying. Businesses are, a part of just the purchase and transaction in the marketplace, but whatever we're going to be purchasing as a consumer on the end, we want to trust the person that's selling that product or service. And this is the same in our industry, right? Especially for business owners that have built this over their entire career. They want to trust that buyer and what they say. And then the next thing is they want a price that's slightly above market. And for those of us that are in, our business brokers, we know that that's a big part of our job. At the beginning of the transaction, when we sign that seller up, is what Len Crick said is the education. He ran education of the IBBA for, 15 years or something. But what he says is you need to get the seller inside the box of reality, because that's where the transaction can occur. And a big part of our job is actually getting that seller inside the box of reality. But what I've found is that their box of reality, they're always on the fringe of it. They want that extra little bit that's above what would, maybe be what would be a normal multiple, right? So, our 2.5 to 3 times multiple, they want to be on the edge of that, the higher edge of it, obviously. This is what a seller wants. They want to sell for maximum price. That's the deal, right? So no shocker there. So these are the main things, like when I was putting this presentation together, I thought about, okay, what is it when I'm working with my sellers and we're kind of moving through transactions that they're really looking for a buyer at the end of the day? And I put number 1 here because I think this is something to think about with our clients, and because we're all advisors here when we're dealing with the buy side and kind of educating them. It's satisfy the seller's goals, right? And for us, those goals will be different. Like the last transaction that we did, sure, everybody wants the money, but really, what do they want to do with the money? Then they want to convert it into something else. They want to convert it into a retirement fund, or they want to buy, a house, or actually that's the transaction we're working on right now. That's what the person wants to do in Vancouver. They need to sell their company just so they can have enough capital to buy a house in that market, right? So their real core driver at the end, when you kind of go down to the bedrock, is it's not really the money. There's something else that's there behind the money that they want. So if the buyer is kind of aware of that, if they know that that's what there's something underneath the money, then they can kind of cater that transaction to satisfy what the seller's needs are. Another example with the last transaction that we just did, the sellers, what they wanted at the end of the day after the transaction was to purchase land so they could build a tiny house community. All right, fine. So if I'm the buyer and I know what the land costs that they're trying to acquire and what it's going to look like for them to set that up, that's really indicating what the cash at close that they want. So this is why I say it's kind of important for a buyer to know what are those true desires that the seller is actually looking for at the end of the day. And for intermediaries like us, and if we're exit planners and we're working with this with the seller, that's not always evident in the first few meetings, right? You need to really get closer with your seller and get that level of confidence with them so they can actually tell you what their core desires are. When that kind of comes into the transaction, that's when things really start to move forward. So that's the one that I put for number one. Hey, let's just really know what the desires actually are of the selling party. Number two that I put here is purchase price and payment terms. Obviously, this is a big one, right? If you don't hit the purchase price, the deal's not going to get done. And what I put here is like a great buyer will have developed systems to best leverage the seller's assets so they can pay slightly more than competitive bids. And what I'm trying to say there is, okay, if you're really trying to educate a buyer here on being a great buyer, then that buyer should focus on a particular industry and develop, systems, processes, strategies to leverage those companies that operate within that industry. So for instance, if I specialize, and we are selling excavation companies now, but if you have a buyer that specializes in that, they're going to be able to come in and they're going to be able to leverage that company much better than just the average person purchasing it off the street. That way because they can lever it, they can pay a little bit more, right? This gets into the whole strategic buyer scenario. And now we're always as sellers are trying to target strategic buyers, but the reason why they're doing that is strategic will pay more. So if you're a buyer and you want to be a great buyer, then choose an industry and become strategic at it. And then you can actually leverage these assets, which will allow you to pay a little bit more, which will then, put you above other competitors that are looking to purchase in that industry. So that's the second one. That's what a great buyer is. Like if I'm on the phone and the buyer has experience in that industry, or the buyer has an experience in buying companies in that industry, that is heaven to me, because I know that they're going to be able to pay a little bit more. Process is going to be streamlined as well, the sale process. The next one I put is shorter training and transition periods. And some of these for us that are in the industry may be obvious, that the seller that's thinking about selling wants to sell. And like part of the reason why they want to sell is they want to free themselves up of the day-to-day work that business they have to put forth to run that business. So if you're a buyer and you have those systems and processes set up, and you can take that business on and transition it quicker, where you can then have the owner exit that business in a faster and quicker manner, then you're going to be more attractive than another person that wants them to stay on for 2-3 years, 6 months, whatever it might be, right? So this goes back to knowing what the seller's goals are. They might want to be out of there in 3 months. Then you're going to be really attractive as a buyer if you can get them out within 3 months. The next one I put here is maintain legacy. So sellers, while they may not put this at the forefront in the beginning, in the initial conversations that we have with our sellers, they're always talking about, the purchase price that they want and the multiple they want to get. But really, at the end of the day, they do want that legacy to carry on. Like when they've worked on these businesses for 10, 20, 30 years, like that's part of them. They actually call it role identity fusion. That's the terminology for it. You're like literally fused to your role in your company, and it's part of your identity. But they want that identity that they created and that legacy to live on. Like we sold or transitioned, I wouldn't necessarily was sold because it's a nonprofit, but I transitioned it through a board of directors, a radio station that I built now 11 years ago. And I turned that radio station on, and if it's playing music that I don't really love, or some of the ads just aren't really up to par, it still bothers me, right? Because even though I'm not involved with it in day to day, and I haven't been involved in it day to day for probably 6 years now, you still feel part of it. You always do as the founder. So people want to know that that legacy is going to be carried on. So for great buyers will understand that. They'll know that, and they'll weave that into their conversations that they're having with sellers. They'll talk about, deals that they've done before and how those businesses are still operating to the standard that they, were historically, and, what they're going to do to improve someone's legacy, like fixing the facade of the building or whatever it might be, right? But that's a big part. That this all falls down to the seller's ego. It's like, again, like when I turn that radio station on and it's the mic levels aren't right between who they're doing the interview with. It's like, that's a chip at my ego a bit, right? So that we want to, as good buyers, will understand that. The next one that I have on here is look after staff and customers. So in these conversations that we have with sellers, oftentimes, if they're sellers that are caring sellers, they care a lot about their customers. They care a lot about their employees, and they want to make sure that this new owner that buys their company and takes on the business is going to look after those customers and look after their employees. So if you're trying to be a fantastic buyer, an exceptional buyer, that's something that you'll talk about, and you'll have a system set up for that shows that the transition process of bringing those new employees onto the new corporation or whatever it might be, making sure that the transition is smooth for the clients and customers. The next one, and this one is, so I did my MBA with the Jack Welch Management Institute, and Jack Welch has passed away now, but he was still alive at the time that I was doing it, and I got to have a phone call with him, which was really exciting for me, a Zoom call. And if they took a student from every single one of the years, and you had to really work hard to get on this call, but once you're on the call, you get to put a question forward to Jack. And Jack, when he was running GE in his tenure, there was a year that they acquired 300 companies. So if you can even imagine it, so literally almost every day in the year they were acquiring a company, and so they would have had systems and processes for that. But I asked him what was the difference between the failures and the successes of the businesses that you purchased and those divisions that ended up getting shut down, or the businesses that you purchased and they thrived and really added to GE's bottom line. And what he said was cultural match. He said cultural match was the biggest thing that they found. That was the determinant that led to success. And in the beginning, they didn't have that in their process when they were acquiring companies. They were mostly acquiring companies for IP. They were trying to get, build quickly. So they were acquiring for personnel and employees. But that cultural piece, they didn't really figure out until a bit later in the process. And when they could get that cultural alignment, then, it didn't slow the machine down at all. They could just keep running forward. And I think that's a big thing that oftentimes is forgotten about. If buyers will think about, they'll be looking at the bottom line and they'll be figuring, okay, yeah, this is going to work for us from, financing perspective, but they aren't thinking about what it looks like after on the day when they start running that business and how those two companies are going to integrate. And I mean, from a personal perspective, I actually say that the company that acquired us, which is like a private equity firm, my property management company, it wasn't a complete cultural alignment. And they liked our culture, and that's why they were acquiring us, but it didn't really align with their corporate culture that they had. And our staff, within a year, they had a complete wholesale changeover of all the staff, right? Which is, you don't want that. That's kind of a bummer on both sides. But that's the culture match piece, right? And so that's really important. So I think a great buyer will know their culture in the organization that they operate, and so they'll be easily able to ally it with the companies that they're acquiring. Or if they aren't acquiring as a strategic, if it's an individual that's acquiring, then they'll know what kind of culture they want to operate in a business, and then they can find something that's going to match for that. The seventh I put is easy sale process. And this one I put on here because a lot of sellers, and again, for those of us that are in the industry, a lot of sellers are selling for the first time. They've never sold a business before. A lot of times they get advice and they hire advisors because they've never been through the process before, and it is a bit of a black box for them. So if they're working with an advisor, the advisor can kind of guide them through the sale process. But if they aren't working for an advisor, and if you're a buyer and you're just out there acquiring companies and you're kind of knocking on doors and saying, hey, listen, we're acquiring companies in your space, would you be interested in selling? That seller on day one, they'll be all excited, guaranteed, about someone wanting to acquire their company, because for them that's cash, but they have no concept of the process. So a great buyer is going to also be an exceptional educator, and they're going to be able to, carry that seller, set expectations through the process of, how things go. Because as you know, it's like if people don't know what's coming up and down the pipeline, it will likely kill the deal, right? So great buyers will have a really good process laid out of how they acquire companies, and they'll be setting the expectations of those sellers. Okay, and the last one I put is time. So I put, don't waste the seller's time with nonsense. Be clear, be efficient, and be fast in your acquisition. If, again, this almost goes back to the process. Like if you have a great process set up, you're going to be able to expedite that sale. And the reality is that sellers that have never been through the process before, they kind of think that selling their company is going to be like putting up, an RV or a vehicle on Kijiji, right? And that you're going to find a buyer and you're just going to negotiate the sale price, and that's going to be it at the end of the day. Of course, as as experts in our industry, in our field, we know it's so much more than that. But they think the time's going to be short. They think it's going to go quick. They think this is going to be a 2-3 month process, right? So first of all, set the expectations. A great buyer will set the expectations of a realistic timeline, but then they'll also have the processes and the team behind them to be able to actually meet those deadlines and move the process along. So this is, this was just to kind of like get our conversation started. And these are the things that I thought about. Of course, it's not completely inclusive of absolutely everything that would make a great buyer. But if someone came along that was checking all these boxes, they would be a fantastic buyer. And from an M&A perspective, and from people like myself that represent sellers, this would be a no-brainer for us. We would have the confidence to move forward with someone like this, and likely put them ahead. Even if they were going to pay a little bit less, we would likely put them ahead of other parties, just because they've got everything, all their ducks in a row. So that's it. That's my presentation for today's session, to get the wheels spinning in our head. And I don't know, I can throw it back to the group and stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Scott. That was fantastic. There's some real nuggets in there. Wes has a question here in the chat. Would you say buyers are looking for more systematized and well-oiled businesses, or are they looking more for the deals like a rental flipping, fixer-uppers? Are they looking for completed, ready-to-go businesses, profitable, or fixer-uppers, in your opinion?
Yeah, in my opinion, in general, like every buyer is unique, right? So I can kind of speak to both, but in general, they're looking for things that are already set up, systematized, running well. I mean, the whole thing comes down to predictable future cash flows, right? Like that at the end of the day is what it all comes down to. It's what is the likelihood of this company making the historical cash flows, which they get to see on the financials? What's the likelihood of this company making those historical cash flows in the future? And if your company that you're representing, or if a seller that owns a company has reduced the risk of that company like failing to generate those cash flows in the future by systematizing the business, that's so much more attractive, right? Now, on the flip side of the coin, that said, if you're a strategic buyer, you already have really good systems and processes set up in the background. You've acquired 5 or 6 other companies in that space. Now you may just be looking for territory. You may just be looking to expand quickly. You may just be looking to buy staff in an area, a new area to operate out of. You may care a little bit less about the systems, but I will tell you that from that seller's perspective, if their systems aren't set up, they're eroding value for sure, because that's going to be a negotiation point from the buyer. They're like, hey, well, it's kind of a bit of a mess. Like we're going to have to go in there and completely clean it up. I'm working with a business like that right now. So my general advice would be, yeah, get everything in order. A better run business is going to be more attractive. It's less risk, and the buyer's going to pay more for it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, I've got one question. I know Giselle's waiting. She's got some more as well, but before Giselle gets in, I'm going to jump in with one of mine. So for a lot of our buyers on Village Wealth have never bought a business before. So coming from that context, if someone's never bought a business before, how can they show a seller that they'll maintain legacy if they don't have that history of already acquiring companies?
Just through being honest with them and letting them know what your objectives are. Like if it's the first business that you've ever purchased, then this is going to be a big investment, and you're going to be putting a lot of your cards on the table for that, or a lot of chips, as you say, on the table, right? Let them know that. Be be candid about it, right? And then you can have mutual empathy for the situation you're in, right? It's like you want more than anybody in the world at that point when you're buying that business for this business to be successful and for that team to stay on and to continue the legacy that they've already built. That's the message that you can send across. I think you can send it just as strongly if you've never bought a business before, or if you have bought a business before. If you have, you can say, hey, here's some testimonials from people that we bought the companies from, and you can talk to them, or you can show what we've done. We kept the business the same, whatever. But if you're doing it for the first time, you can still send that message for sure.
Yeah, fantastic. Giselle.
As a first-time buyer, how do I get a broker to return my phone call when I show interest for a specific listing?
Yeah, have your financing already in order. I should have that up there, right? It's like we're already working with a bank. We've lined up, this is the amount that we're able to, acquire. This is a structure, like you can talk to Community Futures, and then you come to the table serious. Because the problem with, like, that's what I call it the 3 M's, right? And so this is what I even train when I teach my brokerage courses, is the 3 M's. It's like, do they have the money? Do they have the actual cash to be able to do it? And do they have the motivation to purchase this company? That's the second M. And do they have the management experience? So these are the 3 things that we'll screen for. So if you're a new buyer and you're trying to, we want this M&A firm to actually show interest in us, then I want to be able to prove to them in that first conversation that I actually have the money. And an easy way to do that is, we're working with this financial institution and we've already been approved for this much. Boom, you've got the money, right? And then, okay, do you have the management experience? This is the one that usually often kills deals, right? And for people that are new and it's the first company that acquired, I want to be able on that phone call to learn, okay, maybe you've never run a business before, but what was your background? Like, did you work in this industry before? Have you managed people before? Those are the big pieces, right? Because I want to ensure that for my seller's perspective, that these people are going to be successful in the new role when they take the business on, right? And then the next one is motivation. Like, how motivated are these people actually? This one you can solve in the first phone call as a buyer just by saying, we've been looking at businesses now for the last 6 months. I'm like, all right, these people are serious. We've been looking at businesses for the last, year. So we've looked at this many businesses so far. So I know that they have the motivation. They're kind of serious, right? They're out there hunting. And then that'll kind of cover the 3 things. But we have a couple of questions that we asked in the first phone call, but they're really just trying to eke all those things out. So as a new buyer, you want the phone call return. You just got to be able to prove that you're serious, and you cover those 3 M's, that'll do it.
Awesome, thank you. So in terms, because you mentioned engaging with a financial institution prior to that, some buyers find it a little bit difficult because without the opportunity, they can't get the approval for the financials. So how do you kind of...
Yeah. Like, by the way, this is all difficult. Like, it's never supposed to be easy, right?
Yeah.
And like, really, at the end of the day, when we're buying a company, we're shortcutting 10 years of our life and just like using a little bit of capital to do it. And I think it's probably the best way to get things started after starting stuff from scratch. I'm like, why am I doing this? But anyway, it's so I'm not saying it's supposed to be easy, but it can be simple. It's like all you're doing is reaching out. You're going to have to make these relationships with the financial institutions anyway. So, and by the way, what's the job of these individuals? Is to lend money. They got to get money out into the marketplace. So if I make 5 phone calls, I've now started to develop 5 relationships with different lenders. And when I have a phone call with a potential seller or an M&A advisor, like, we're working with 5 financial institutions. Like, that's enough for me to know, okay, this person's serious, like, they're going out there. Because what we're really trying to do at the end of the day, like, regardless of what industry we're working, like, all we have is our time, right? And we're really trying to just use our time as most effectively as possible. And we're trying to screen out tire kickers. Like, that's part of the reason why people hire me. They don't want to deal with the tire kickers. They don't want to, they want to run their companies, right? So if it's my job to weed out the tire kickers, if you haven't even got to the point of figuring out your financing to acquire this business, like, forget it. Like, you're not even close. Like, the next guy already has like partners lined up and they've got money in the bank, right? So that's I guess that's a big one. But yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, it's all good. Yeah.
Josh.
Yeah. Hey, Scott. Great session so far. Obviously, I'm biased, but so I wanted to ask a question about your three M's, and great analogy there. So, have you been in a situation where the customer or future buyers got their money sorted out, their motivation right on point, and they potentially lack the management piece? What advice do you have for that buyer, and how do they help supplement it? Because you can't be like, well, go get it and come back 10 years from now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's a really good question because, and again, like when I teach my course, I say that M, the management experience M, is the toughest one. And the reason why for me it creates the highest level of risk is we've just gone through, a bunch of deals, and when they collapse, it's like, okay, I do a post-mortem on them. Like, why did this deal collapse? Like, why did this buyer walk away from the table late in the day? And what I oftentimes figured out was, oh, they lost confidence. Like they lost confidence in themselves. And that's because they didn't have the management experience. And I use the management because it like fits in with the 3 M's because it makes it easy to remember. But really it's just experience, like it's a whole different ball game like when you're running a business. So I don't know. I think at the end of the day, like if they don't have enough, then a good way to do that is they're going to have to extend the time and transition that they're working with that owner, right? So they're maybe instead of the business transitioning in 2 months, they're going to set up a time that it's going to transition longer, and they could maybe set it up so that they're now paying a little bit for that owner, a consulting fee. So it's giving them that extra little bit of confidence for them to, work alongside the owner, but the owner's getting compensated for that. Owners are usually quite open to continuing on helping out on a consultative basis if they're getting compensated for their time, right? They don't want to be hanging around for 2-3 months. And by the way, it can also be difficult if the business transitions to new ownership, but the old owner is like hanging around for a long period of time, because the employees and even the customers have a hard time looking to that new owner as the new owner, right? So there is that like fine line when you actually want ownership, the current ownership gone, because it makes the transition actually work better. But they can still consult from afar, like phone, Zoom, whatever, pop in here and there to consult. Just the buyer should expect to pay for that. So they're trying to buy that management experience from the current seller, then pay for it, and then the seller will be okay with it. So I guess that would be one of my suggestions. And then the other one is, like you said, you go and get experience somehow, right? Like if you are looking to buy in a specific industry, then maybe go and volunteer in that industry. I don't know, like you need to do whatever you can to pick up experience. But the bulk of it comes from managing people. Like at the end of the day, that's what it is. It's like, okay, I'm running a company, sure, but I'm managing people. That's at the end of the day what it's all about. So if they can get experience in managing people, which that you can get kind of anywhere, right? There's so many boards that need help, and there's so many volunteer organizations that need help, and there's really rounding out management of people. That's what's going to give them the skill set and the confidence. So that would be my answer there.
Thanks for sharing that. I do have a follow-up question around the culture piece, because you talked about that a little bit. It's a really interesting one, only because there's been so much data written about like when you're hiring for culture fit, you shouldn't, right? So I'm curious your opinion on this, and debate this with me. Have you, like, how do you advise your clients about assessing culture, and not whether it fits for them, that this is the culture you want to actually inherit moving forward?
Yeah, that's also another really good question, because to be honest with you, a lot of times my wife's an organizational psychologist, so I kind of have in my back pocket, I have someone that helps solve this. So in our process, what we do, because this is what happens, to be honest with you, in real world scenarios, is you meet an owner, they want to sell their business, you connect with them, you do that first audit of the company, is it sellable? And you look through everything, and a lot of times the cultural piece hasn't been developed inside the organization in a standardized, formatted way. It always exists. Every single business has a culture. It usually comes from the founder, almost always. It's just basically as a trickle down from the founder, and like their personality style just goes to the organization. But it's not very often that they've documented it, unless the company is like a little bit larger and they've gotten to that point where they've done that work. So what we'll do is we actually do that work with people. When we do their marketing material, we put that together. Part of that process is forcing them to eat that out. So we like, what's their mission? What's their values? You know, how are they operating from a principal's perspective on this company? And, you know, what does their culture look like? And then we round that out, and then that's actually in the marketing deck. So people understand if they're acquiring that company, they can see the alignment right there. But to answer your questions, like that work usually has to be done prior to going to market because the owner hasn't done it yet. And then on the buy side, like they really haven't done that work either yet. They haven't thought about, hey, listen, where do I want to work for the next 5-10 years, right? Like what kind of environment do I want to be in? The challenge becomes when the buyer knows what they want, it's not in alignment with what the company currently has. They acquire the company and then they come in and it's a full sale cultural change. And what that looks like for employees is, hey, we don't do it that way around here. Like that, and then that creates friction between new ownership and, you know, you lose efficiency there and that kind of stuff. So that's why the culture piece is important. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem.
Scott, a lot of companies now are, existing companies are potentially, if they've never made an acquisition before, are now considering it just because of the state of maybe their industry or their market in different segments. And now they're looking at it and going, well, maybe we'll grow through acquisition. What advice do you have for existing companies who've never made an acquisition before? And, you know, maybe this ties into a little bit of the culture conversation too, is, you know, that's definitely something that they should be keeping top of mind. But any advice for companies that have never made an acquisition before as they step into this process?
Yeah, for sure. My biggest piece of advice is get your own house in order. Like that's the biggest thing, because when you acquire a business, it will throw your current company temporarily into chaos. It's like for those of you out there that have had kids, I have a 16-month-old daughter, and that experience of throwing that whole new piece into the equation throws your life into slight chaos. It just is, because it's all these new moving pieces. You're like, oh, now we need to figure out daycare, and need this, and need that. So it would have been challenging if like we just didn't have our house in order, call it, right? You need to do the same thing with your business. Say, all right, what do our systems and what do our processes look like? And like, are they documented? And do we even know our culture? And like, what's the primary product that we're selling? What are our margins? What are your margins today? This can be a mess up too. It's like, okay, your current company is running at an 8% margin. All right, great. What's the company that you're acquiring running at? If they're running it like a 2, okay, then they're not efficient. It can tell you right out of the gates instantly, this company is not efficient. So we're going to rely on our systems and processes as we bring this new company in. So very important that you've gotten that up to speed. If their margins are better, awesome, right? You can now maybe adopt some of the stuff that they've done and bring it over to your company and improve yours. But if you don't know what yours are, then that's an issue right there, right out of the gates, right? So I don't want to do can I do a plug here? Maybe, I don't know. Do I plug? Can I plug? So one of the companies that we had speak at our 10X Live event was called Capitalize. And their tool, bar none, is the best one I've come across if you want to do an audit on any business. So for us that are in this industry right now, that are transition advisors, that their tool is a monster. Like it is amazing. And it's like so easy to use. But what it does is it goes, okay, listen, you're thinking about selling your business. Here's exactly where you're weak, gives you the score, all the rest of it. There's other tools out there, obviously, that do this, but none I've not used any because I haven't come across any that are decent enough that we would want to implement in our business. This one is. But I would say for someone who's thinking about acquiring, figure out where your company's at using that tool or a tool like it. And then you can know, all right, are we really ready? Because you're going to get thrown into chaos. And if you get your house in order first, then you bring it in and then you acquire a company. Now you can just do it on repeat, right? And that is such a good way to scale. But my wife's working with a company right now that's what they're doing in the wealth planning industry. And so they're acquiring companies across North America. But their biggest thing that they're messed up on, or like they look back like, oh darn it, we wish that we really like had some of these tools in place before, was the cultural piece. And like, how do you get that new business that you're acquiring quickly up to speed, right? So they don't slow down your current operations. That's the biggest thing. But I would say, to quickly put it in a nutshell, it's like, make sure your house is in order. That's all.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Giselle, do you have any?
Well, I wanted to see if anybody else had any questions that they're sitting on or that they want to talk to Scott. Anybody?
I just had a question for Scott in regards to the Capitalize audit tool. Is that the workflow admin audit tool?
No, it's not. I mean, it does do workflow. And we can have a conversation afterwards, Wes, because I know that I actually wrote down that like your business impact coaching, and like it would maybe be a tool that you guys could use. We use it in the beginning process because it does this insight reports. So for us, we'll just use it to do two things. One, figure out if this company is actually sellable and we want to engage it. And also like put the roadmap of what needs to be done to increase value to make it sellable. So that's what the tool does. Then it does also have a process where it guides the client through the whole process of value enhancement. But that for us, that's not an element that we utilize in the tool. It's just the insight report that we use. Because then from there, it's like, for us, it's a check or balance. It's like, hey, is it sellable? Yes, let's do it. Is it not? Send it to Wes, like that's really where we're at. Yeah.
Right. Have you used any of the value builder tools in their assessments, and how would you compare that to Capitalize?
Yeah, so I was a value builder. I mean, I went to conferences with John in Vancouver, and so I probably did his program 6 years ago, maybe. So we've used it, yeah. And so it does have similar aspects, but this for us we found was much better when we're trying to target clients that are doing between that 5 to call it 50 million. It doesn't break down, right? So that's
Cool. Thanks, Scott.
Yeah, no problem.
I do have a question. For a first-time buyer, how many people or advisors should a buyer engage with throughout their acquisition process?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way of really pinpointing that, I don't think. Like I actually asked that same question to acquisitions.com, Lauren Pover, he owns that company. And they were basically getting pretty big on YouTube. I'm like, oh, I need to have this guy on my summit. And so I asked him that exact same question. And he said, because he represents, like, that's his whole philosophy is, hey, let's bring more buyers into the marketplace because there's going to be lots of business that need to sell. And, there's just probably not going to be enough educated buyers out there, I think is his big thing, right? So I asked him that question, how many deals are people looking at before they actually acquire a company? And he said some of his people will look at one and it's like, well, works, and some are looking at 100. There was another Snowden Capital. I asked them that same question too on my summit, and he had a similar answer. He's like, hey, sometimes we'll look at 5, sometimes we'll look at 100, but you're trying to find that fit. And I think for framing it as like the new buyer, you just kind of know what you want right? Like
Refining your search.
Refining what you want. It's like, okay, what's your industry that you really want to work in? What's the size that you're looking to acquire? Is their management already in place, or are you going to put that in afterwards? Are you going to be the owner operator? Like, if you have I think this is everything in life, and I've found that nothing in my life seems to work until I actually really refine what it is that I'm trying to do, even to the point where it's like, okay, you're buying, like, what was the last thing? Oh, the last thing that I bought was an electric bike, right? And I'm like, okay, what is the exact electric bike that I want? And then it took forever to figure it out. But then once you know exactly what you want, then there it is, right? And I think that was the same with business for buyers, new buyers, like figure out exactly what it is that you want, and then you'll find it. Yeah. What is the name of the software company? I'd be interested in exploring it. Yeah, Rick, we can be connected and we can follow up with that. It's Capitalize. So it doesn't have I can type in the chat. Doesn't have the E on the end of it, it's a Z, but anyway, yeah, my H is capitalized, but anyway, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, it's for SEPAs, like anyway, it's a beast. It's awesome, but not to get looped into that, I suppose, on our.
I'll jump in again. As far as already having their financing in place, what's your preference for seeing, for buyers having an accountant and a lawyer already? How far down the road should they have gotten with those professionals before engaging or through the process?
I think it's good if they have a lawyer that they can trust and is experienced, especially if you're a first-time buyer. you can lean really heavy on your lawyer as you go through the process because they'll have been through a bunch of them before. I think that piece is really important, and that they're experienced in business transactions. Be honest and forthright with that lawyer when you're searching for them, that of the size of deal you're doing, because that's going to put you with the right lawyer. You're buying a business that's going to be $250,000, then you're going to be working with a different legal representative than if you're buying one that's $2.5 million, right? So the lawyer, I think, is a big piece. Having an accountant, they probably already have a relationship with an accountant. If not, then you can start one, but they aren't going to really give you all that much time as far as like leading into the process until you actually find something to acquire, incorporate, the entity that you're using to acquire it. But I would say the lawyer is the one that you would want to start developing a relationship with. The main reason why you want that is just time, because in our process, we basically, if lawyers aren't existent on either side, then we get them connected right early. But it's just an initial introduction. They do that initial introduction, initial Zoom call that's an hour long or whatever, so there's a level of comfort. And then now they're already, like, I'll talk as if I'm talking to the buyer, but you're already set up in their system. So it's like you don't need to be onboarded into that company. You're already there. And then when you actually need them, because you could need them like at a moment's notice, they're there, right? I think that's the biggest advantage of having somebody that's already lined up. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So what are your recommendations for a buyer who says, I'm agnostic, I'm not industry specific, for refining their search criteria, like talking about your electric bike? How do you get a buyer to narrow down exactly what they want if they've never bought something before?
Yeah, choose the bottle of wine that you like, or whiskey, or if you don't drink, whatever your favorite beverage is, and then sit down with it and think about what you want your life to look like. That's would be my honest suggestion. The other thing that you can do to be like less cheeky about it is buy or just sign up online to the business reference guide or business valuation resources. Those are two tools that will allow you to kind of look at industries, what things have sold for historically, and more importantly, what the margins are in those industries. That could be a really nice exercise, right? Like the business reference guide, it's sold as a hard copy book, and it is maybe 350 pages. It's kind of like this thick. I've done that exercise. It's kind of nice. Like you just sit down with that book and you just kind of flip through it. And it's like, oh, here's all the industries that exist, and here's what they sell for, and here's the challenges in those industries. And like you'll know right at the gates. Like this exercise took me 3 hours. I did it when we were deciding on like, okay, where do we want to niche down to in the companies that we're going to be servicing moving forward? That's how we ended up landing on the excavation side of things, because the margins are nice, and they have capital in the business already. It's that the people that are in that industry could definitely use our help. So, and I all my friends that own excavation companies, I like all of them. So it's like, these are people that I want to work with moving forward, same exercise for buying. It's like, all right, these are all the industries that exist. And, we probably want to get into one if you're buying something for the first time that's a high margin industry, because why the heck not, right? You're in the game to make money if you're a buyer. So do that. And then it won't take you very long to narrow down to 40. And then from there, that's when when you think about, hey, who do I want to work with and where do I want to be moving forward? That'll narrow it down to 10. And now you have 10, and then you can kind of start looking and searching in that 10. And that exercise will probably help narrow it down a bit more. That would be my suggestion on how to do that.
Perfect. With a plug for Village Wealth here, as any of our members, brokers, advisors, or buyers have access to IBIS reports through free access to IBIS reports through your membership. So an IBIS report is like an industry data reference to look at a swath of information on each individual industry. So IBIS reports are part of the Village Wealth value there.
I did not know you guys had that. That was the one that I was trying to think when I was just talking. I'm like, what's the better one? And I couldn't come up with it. So there it is. That's what I was trying to search for in my brain. That's amazing. Yeah. So use that, because we use that as well when we were going through the process. Mm-hmm.
They're amazing reports. They're very in-depth and fantastic.
They're good. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments from any of the other advisors on the call today with what you guys are seeing in the buying space? What different acquirers are facing and how they can set themselves apart in your experience? Steve or Dave, I'm gonna look to you.
One thought, well, one comment, talking about buyers that are serious or not, and a question being, well, how long have you been looking? Sometimes I think the reverse can be true too. If they've been looking for too long, maybe they're eternal tire kickers.
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah.
It's more like a hobby. Like, this is kind of cool. They imagine themselves as a business owner, but they're not quite really ever going to pull the trigger. So I think there's a bit of a balancing act there. But
no, I think Steve's 100% accurate there, because that's exactly where it comes down to. It's like, what's the motivation? That's my M. It's like, what's their motivation? And they'll say, oh, I want to be a business owner. Like, okay. Like, everybody wants to be a business owner. I get it, like, control your destiny, blah, blah, blah. Right. But it's got to be deeper than that for sure. And then you have the tire kickers that look forever. That's the person that has the lottery ticket and just likes to dream and never goes checks the numbers.
I've spoken to other brokers in town on occasion, and maybe we're comparing war stories, and well, yeah, I got this one guy, and you just describe him. You don't give the name. And then the other guy goes, oh, is his first name John? And yeah, you know what? He asked about every one of my businesses, but never.
Yeah.
Another comment was with that, again, that buyer who doesn't know what they're looking for. Well, I want something with good margins, or I want something that's very profitable, as long as it's profitable. And you just know that, no, that's not going to work as long as it's profitable. Well, there are a lot of things, but and I've had a lot of trouble trying to get somebody to narrow that down. And sometimes I'll just say, well, all right, here's a couple of websites. Tell me, what stands out. Like, and when I say websites, like business listing websites.
Yeah.
Whether it's my own, but just simply, businesses for sale or something. What stands out, and try to get a little bit more like focus on, well, okay, I see a bit of a pattern. If they give me 3 or 4 businesses that seem interesting to them, sometimes I can see a pattern or something like that.
Yeah, I agree with that as well too, because it's like, sure, you want something profitable, I get it. Like, that's kind of the entry point, right? But you want to love what you're doing. Like, you're going to be doing this for the next how many years? Yeah, I don't know. I think buyers should think about that a bit more. I think I should think about that a bit more. I messed that up. Maybe that's why I know. It's like, it's a hot dog cart guy, and oh man, I did so many things I hated. I'm like, why am I doing this? I didn't think, right? Anyway, whatever. Actually, I like being the hot dog cart guy because it was good. You know, a lot of free time with that one.
One of the questions that we ask our buyers when they come to our platform and create a buyer profile is, what role do you want to play within the business? Because it does help them kind of refine their search. In what industry, bringing it back to, management, operator, so on and so forth. And yeah, like, I know we talk a lot about, the tire kickers and the time wasters and buyers, but I think for some of them, it comes down to, lack of education. So, hey, come to Village Wealth, come camp out. We'll help guide you. We'll help educate you on what that process looks like. We'll team you up with the right people that can help you depending on where you are in the process as well.
Yeah, really well said, Giselle. I mean, to that point is the buyers looking to scratch an itch. We are a wicked platform to do that. Even your point, Scott, about your 3 M's, the money part around our verification. It's a great entry point to begin and kind of get a quick check mark. What I've been trying to digest is the other 2 pieces around management and motivation. And, there's tools and apps available to shortcut that in a particular way. So you and I can connect about that afterwards.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think, like, if you're working with those buyers that are just having a hard time with that, it's like there is some point where part of the thing you need to do is just take the leap. Like, it's like that Indiana Jones. I'm 48, and I think a lot of the team that works here is a bunch younger than me, and they don't understand these references sometimes. But when he's like in the Temple of Doom or whatever, he just has to make that step out into the gap. It's like sometimes you just got to do that, and buyers, there's a point where that happens.
Absolutely. Our Rob, our CEO, calls it paralysis by analysis. You just continue to review opportunities. I want to hear a last comment from Dave, because I know he works a lot in this space with acquisitions as well. And I see you have your mic off, Dave. Did you have anything to add? And then we'll be conscious of everyone's time and cut it off.
Maybe just a general comment that probably will lead to a question at some point, but boy, in the last couple of months, I've sure been fielding a lot more calls from business owners that are ready to sell. And, you know, the market economy in Calgary has been pretty tough since about 15 or 16. And then layer COVID on top of that, a lot of these guys have been on the sidelines, still running their business profitably, but, you know, waiting for the turnaround. And I'm getting the sense that even if the turnaround isn't fully here, they're getting ready to pull the trigger or get prepared. And I don't know if others are seeing that and how that's going to affect the supply-demand equilibrium, but it could be an issue in the coming months, or at least I wonder if it will be.
I think Dave's nailed it. It's people were maybe thinking about before COVID. Now they've gone through it. They don't want to go through anything again. They're like, I'm done. Like but they had to carry it through because you can't sell it during, right?
Yep. It's interesting. I just came off a webinar with the M&A Club, and it was a valuator who was doing a presentation, and she put business owners in a bucket. There was, you know, the stabler 1, stabler 2, people that have loved COVID, and then people that have been devastated by it. And and she had about 6 or 7 different buckets of where the state of businesses are, you know, as they came through COVID. And it really is, so many different businesses have seen different situations, and it's really, you know, which bucket do you fall in the state of your business, and where is it going from there, and what are you ready for next? But it's 12:30 now, or 12:30 Mountain